Hello and welcome everybody wherever you may be. My name is Peter Jagend and I'm hosting this series of interviews with entrepreneurs and investors who work on data science related startups. It's our sixth interview and today I'm talking to Nick, who is a co-founder and the CEO of QuestDB, a fast open source time series database. It's a pleasure to have you here, Nick.
Likewise. Thanks, Peter.
Awesome. So to start the conversation, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about QuestDB? What do you guys do?
Sure. So yeah, I'm co-founder CEO of QuestDB. And QuestDB is the fastest open source database for time series data. Time series data is pretty much everywhere nowadays. So for example, when you buy online, Amazon uses time series to predict future orders and maintain a good amount of stock. When you check out, Stripe uses time series to detect fraud. So we basically empower developers with an open source database that is highly performant, but also accessible through SQL.
Yep. It sounds like an interesting and relevant thing for the community of data scientists. So can you give us an insight about how do you start that business? How did you make a change from, I assume, a corporate career towards the starting a company?
Sure. So my first step was to move from a corporation, which was a bank at the time, into a startup. And I think that's a great first step for anybody to really understand the dynamics of, an early stage startup, which is very, very different and unique compared to, larger corporations. And that's where I met my co-founders, Vlad and Tank. And we took it from there. So the story is that we basically started to work on a common project. The startup was building an exchange, and we were all involved in that endeavor. And then we started to interact and learn more about each other. And the interesting thing is that the company, the database QuestDB, underpins some of this exchange, and therefore we started to learn much more about products, and basically this led me to become super passionate about this, share insights with Vlad and Tank, and eventually start a company.
Interesting. So it seems like a more gradual switch from a corporation. You joined a startup and then you launched your own startup, right? So it's not an immediate switch from corporation to a startup your own. It's something more like a gradual change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it facilitated the starting a company. So first, obviously, being at a startup means that you're more likely to find co-founders. That is a fact.
Okay.
But also it's a great way to see if you thrive in an environment which is super unpredictable, fast moving, which is really the main characteristic of early stage companies. So those are the two things which I think are very important to be aware of before starting a company.
And what was your background? What were you doing in the bank before joining the startup? You didn't mention that. Can you just add some colors?
Yeah, sure. So I was in M&A at Rothschild, and we were doing something a bit different than other banks. So we were dealing with a lot of time series data in order to basically get new insights about M&A transactions. So for example, how to better price a deal by looking at 30 years worth of investors data. And therefore we had databases, a lot of data, a lot of sort of analysis of this data, and which was a bit of a different take on on M&A than other banks. So that is where my experience with time series data came from.
Yes, that I would say explains quite a lot, because it's not an obvious transition, right, from an M&A banker to someone who builds a database, but you were much more data-driven compared to others, investment bankers. Okay, nice. And how your decision to launch your own company was born. Was it quite a long iterative process, or it was like more Eureka, and you decided one night that you need to leave your job at that startup and start your own?
Yeah, I had this on the back of my mind, once joining a startup. But then it's really, I think, linked to your intuition, so is it a good time to go for it? And I don't think there should be like certain milestones, you need to see. It's just a feeling. And actually to back this up, I've seen whilst going to YC, I've seen a lot of founders coming up with an idea, then sort of changing, massive pivot, and then coming with a product by the end of the batch. So I don't really think that you necessarily need to think about this for forever before getting into the process of starting a company. And maybe not directly answering the question, but tightly linked to that is you could eventually start at a side project. And this is how sort of QuestDB was born, right? It was our co-founder, Vlad, who started QuestDB as an R&D endeavor, and literally built the product for many years. And open source is a great way to get feedback from the community on what you're building, actually. So that could be a great way to get where this is going, and then eventually, start a company on the back of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you've mentioned that you've met with two other co-founders at the startup, so you knew each other. But the decision to leave and to start building QuestDB full time, have you made this decision simultaneously and left the previous company more or less at the same time, or it was a combination of somebody doing full time, somebody else doing part time? How did it look like?
Yeah, pretty much. We went for it all together, full time. I think once you decide to go for it, it's probably better to go for it 100% rather than dipping your toes and like doing it part time, say, because it's such a hard thing to do. The odds are against you in the first place. So if you don't put all your mind effort to it, it's going to be even harder. So that is why we just decided to go for it 100%.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I've heard a similar view, but a bit different perspective from somebody else with whom I've talked earlier. So another co-founder told me that leaving altogether makes a process of synchronization a bit easier, because when you are full-time and somebody else is not, it's difficult to synchronize. It's difficult to understand the contribution. It's among other things. So you just added another angle to pretty much the same view. Nice. To me, it also seems very logical. And when you look at the founding team, at least for your industry, for a startup that does something similar at the infrastructural layer, database, maybe something else, but something similar, how do you think about the ideal team? How do you think about the composition of skills, expertises, etc.?
I think having at least one co-founder who is deeply technical and really has a lot of experience in that field is obviously super important. And there needs to be some passion, about the industry itself, the space. And if you're sort of solving problems for, say, developers, you need to have some compassion for developers. You need to really understand their problems, and you need to want to help them, right? So this needs to be like a driver behind this that is quite strong. Then, in our case, we actually have very complementary skills. So Vlad, for example, is super technical, and I'm sort of the least technical founder here. And we sort of learned a lot, from each other. And I learned more of the technical stuff over the months, and perhaps Vlad, for example, learned a bit more of the, how to raise money and all that stuff. So I guess, yeah, it's fine to have one or two co-founders who are maybe less technical, it really works for us. But I think, you know, it does require a bit of work to fill the gaps eventually, right? Because if you work on a deeply technical product, you really need to understand how it works and how, you know, also understand your users, you know, how users solve their problems with your product. And you know, this needs to be fully understood. But to start with, yeah, I think it's not unusual to see this kind of complementary skill set.
And what are, in your opinion, might be the best maybe approaches or some hacks how to actually build a productive relationships between someone who is deeply technical and someone who is less technical, so to make this team working very synchronized, very organized, productive, etc. What are the secrets maybe, or hacks, or learnings that you derived from your experience? Because what I typically see is that many data science heavy teams are 100% technical. So you may have 2 or 3 individuals who are data scientists or researchers or engineers. And when somebody else's with less technical background joins, it's difficult to synchronize. So how we can make it better?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of teams where, say, the CEO only takes the calls, right? Say with potential customers or whatever, and the CTO codes all day. That kind of dynamic. In our case, sometimes, especially in the early days, I did need, you know, Vlad on a certain call, which might be super technical, and vice versa. So I think actually doing things together a little bit more is a good hack. And, you know, this could be VC meetings. This could be sort of customer user calls, and even, like, you know, when talking about product and roadmap and etc. So that's probably one great way to align yourself with your co-founder. The other thing is, I didn't, you know, realize initially that as a developer you need to be in a sort of state of flow to code well, and that by interrupting that person all the time is not going to happen. So initially I was interrupting, say, Vlad all the time about random stuff, and then I sort of stopped. I was a bit more conscious about this, and we learn how to not step over each other's toe, so to speak. And now it does work pretty well. But I think like massive level of interaction is probably the key, you know. And now we sort of do this widely at the team level. So we have 2 calls per day with everybody on the call, and that really helps. So it's all about like huge communication all the time, and sort of kind of triggering this communication a lot. That really helps.
Interesting. Yeah. And obviously founders, especially at the early stages, they learn a lot, right? You learn about each other, about how to run the company. And one dimension of learning is definitely learning about industries, customers, sectors, etc. And the question that, quite a popular question, is how to find the balance between doing a business with new industries and the industries that you have some previous experience in. For instance, right, you might be a data scientist who worked in banks for all life. Does it mean that he or she needs to start a startup for banks? Or maybe it could be a startup, data science startup for biotech. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I don't believe that's the case. And I've seen a lot of examples where, you know, this does not hold true. I guess it helps because you might understand what, you know, specific, say, developers face in terms of problems. So if you've been working in banks, you know what developers at banks face problem-wise with a database, and therefore it might be a bit easier to build a product that solves the problem. But I think you can get there regardless, right? And that just starts with talking to potential users as soon as possible and really understanding what you need to build in order to solve their problems. So if you do that early enough, I don't think you necessarily need an expertise in a given industry. Of course, it helps, and obviously the pitch you may have to raise money to investors is going to resonate a lot better if you have specific knowledge in an industry. But if you show that you're passionate about a specific industry and you understand what users need, I guess it's fine. And sometimes actually the industry you end up working in is a byproduct of product market fit. So say that you find a pull from customers, in like, I don't know, in media, whatever. Well, you don't need to be a media expert per se. It just happened, right? Because your product solves their problems. And if there's product market fit, it's just gonna then, it's just gonna work if you execute well on the back of that. So yeah, long answer to say not necessarily.
I would definitely love to talk a bit more about this product market fit concept, but before, just one step back, you mentioned these conversations and talks with customers when you learn. And I know that some teams, again, especially very technically driven and technically heavy teams, or data science heavy teams, they struggle even to get these first conversations. How did it work out with you? Who were these initial first potential customers with whom you talked? How did you get to them? Is it cold calls, conferences, your personal network, whatever? What were the first and what were the ways to approach the first potential customers in your case?
Yeah, usually it's people part of your network. So people you already know. That's how it usually starts. And it's the easiest way really to get any sort of feedback. For us, really, like, it was super interesting to talk to early users. And yeah, because there's so many, it really like took the majority of our time. And we're open source. We're not really selling anything for now. So yeah, we were not sort of prospecting too much. We were just trying to utilize the network in the early days to understand what problems developers were facing with their databases, and whether there was really a need for a time series database like ours to sort of validate the idea in some ways. But very, very soon we ended up focusing on developers who were using the product one by one and understanding why they were switching, what made them tick. And that really helps, really understand the value prop of QuestDB, and what kind of industries we would get a pull from, etc.
Let's then switch gears and talk a bit more about this idea of product market fit. How do you define it for yourself operationally? Because there is no single, at least I don't know a single definition that is kind of agreed by everyone. So it's a very general concept, and a lot of people operationalize it in different ways. So what is your way or thinking about that?
Yeah, the thing is we don't have it, so it's hard to say, but it looks like if you don't have explosive usage of the product, you may not have what customers want at that point in time. So I guess it would be akin to like a feeling of losing control 24/7, right? You feel like the product is pulled away from you, that kind of thing. A good analogy, I guess, and that's what we're still experiencing, much less than the beginnings, but still a little bit, is the sensation of pushing this sort of boulder up the hill, right? You just need to find ways to push it further and further, and when you hit product market fit, it just starts to roll on its own, and you just need to sort of run away after it, right? Not lose sight of the thing and run as fast as possible to make sure you don't lose total control. So I would think of product market fit like that. And this means if you follow that thorough definition, a lot of companies think they have product market fit when they don't. And this could be potentially quite dangerous because, and also, there's an incentive to think you've got it, especially for investors. So an investor might be reassured to think that, the portfolio company has product market fit. and therefore that would lead to maybe like more spending, more hiring, more, doing more corporate things around the company. But if you haven't really hit product market fit, you're still very much likely to fail at that point. So yeah, I think that's a pretty key concept. That's probably misunderstood quite a bit as well.
And what are the ways, or what are ways or opportunities to go through this illusion and to understand realistically that you don't have it? So is it like what you can use as a mirror to look at the company without illusions and to understand that there is no product market fit right now? Is it talking with someone, or look at particular metrics, or maybe something else?
Yeah, I think it's being sure to not use vanity metrics, right? That might give you the perception that things are going amazingly well. Open source companies, I guess, we might want to potentially exclude revenue from the equation, because you could still have community market fit, just not have any revenue and have explosive usage of the product everywhere. And for a database, for example, once it's in production, then monetization becomes a bit easier after, because it is such a sticky product, right? So I guess it really depends on the dynamics and the product itself. But for like more traditional companies, then revenue growth, and eventually like profitability. Is this thing making money? Yes, okay, we have definitely reached product market fit. So yeah, it's just choosing the right KPIs and not lie to yourself. And that's probably a first good way of discerning whether you think you have it when you don't.
Let's switch gears and talk about open source. That's a super interesting topic. I know at least 2 or 3 quite active open source projects within the community. So it's definitely something that resonates with a lot of data scientists whom I know. So can you explain, just for those who don't know about the concept of open source, what it is, and why is it valuable for corporations, especially, to use open source products?
Yeah, I'm gonna maybe give an example to start with. So recently spoke to a bank, pretty big one, and they told me that they exclusively are choosing open source software because, one, they see this distribution model as viable. So the code is still around even if the company fails. And I think like a good example here is RethinkDB, which is a YC company, by the way. And yeah, they sort of shut down a few years ago, and the project is still going pretty strong. A lot of contributors, maintainers of the project, and donations everywhere. So sort of ensures longevity of the project, which is probably reassuring where competition is super high, right? So for example, in the world of databases, I think it's a good example. Yeah. And then maybe second is control. So they're not at the mercy of a vendor lock-in kind of thing, and they've got more control on their stack. So I think those two reasons seem to be driving a lot of decisions, even at big companies like banks, who were previously sort of buying big licenses and now switching towards open source software. And generally the way we see sort of open source software adoption is really through individual developers. So let's take a big company, right? Big tech company. So you have a few of their employees using the software on their own, and then sort of pushing this within the organization. And through this force, you'll then have the CTO deciding to actually adopt it across the entire company. And that is a sort of a way for adoption enterprise wide, that is very different than having a sort of top down approach where you directly go sell a product to the CTO. So with open source, we really need this push bottom up from developers in the first place.
And should there be any special team composition or any special expertise within the team to do open source? What I'm trying to understand is, does open source model fit to every team, to every product? I mean, B2B, let's say infrastructure product, or there are some specific things that make open source well suited for one team, not to another?
I think it's a mindset more than attribute. So if you just want to add value to communities and just empower developers through this approach, I think it's fine. So we get a lot of developers asking a lot of questions. They're not paying for anything, but we're still here to help them. And you need to have, as I said before, sort of compassion for developers and really wanting to unblock them and solve their problems. So I think if you've got this philosophy and you also, you're used to contribute to other open source projects, that's probably a good indicator that, it's something for you. So yeah, I would think anybody can do it. It's just a mindset kind of thing.
And, how is it different in terms of building product? How is it different in terms of prioritizing what to build actually? Because prioritizing what to build is quite a messy thing, even for closed source traditional software. You have multiple potential customers, and everyone wants you to customize something or to build a certain integration, certain feature. And I assume that for open source projects, it might be even harder and more complex. Am I right here?
Yeah. The complexity is that a lot of people, developers asking for certain features, and obviously there need to be prioritization, right? And there's a roadmap from the company, and usually big items to ship, and all those little things here and there can be a bit of a distraction. So it's really sort of mitigating that. Whilst not ignoring what the community is asking for, but sometimes, if there is a really strong pull from the community, it would actually be a mistake to totally ignore it, right? It can be a very, very big signal. So it's, gauging whether that signal is worth, really devoting a lot of time and resources. And, some fixes are like quite fast. So if somebody asks us something and we can unblock that person in like 20 minutes, we should probably do it. It's going to take us, 30 days of solid work. It might be a bit of a different situation. But I think the idea is to be transparent, really, let them understand what the roadmap is, and they will understand, right? And sometimes they're actually willing to wait. So if they like the product a lot, they will be excited to see the progress and, get updates, then, try whenever there is a new thing, even though it's not perfect yet, and eventually, they'll stick around and be part of the journey in some ways. So yeah.
And I guess another level of complexity here, I mean, with open source software, it's not only about prioritization of what to build, but it's also about the decision of what to put into a free version, right? You typically don't have this choice when you do traditional software. So what's your approach to that? How do you decide, or how do you think about adding something to a free version and not adding something there?
Yeah, the first thing, I guess, is consistency over time. So probably avoiding mistakes like having something for free, then, changing your mind and having it in the paid version, because that sort of is really problematic, and the community will not follow what you're doing anymore. So that's the first thing. Then, the sort of open source versions should really solve problems of, sort of majority of developers, not number wise. It should really, we see like the paid offering as, enabling big corporations with like huge, enormous amounts of data. So in order to operate QuestDB at scale, and that's when, those extra features built around QuestDB open source start to make sense. But yeah, we through this model, we really want to empower a lot of developers through the free products. So yeah, it's very, very critical. It's something we're thinking about all the time. And sometimes you can be a little bit creative, right? So for example, replication, which is a big thing. Some open source projects have previously, changed their mind about it. Some companies only have it in their paid offering, etc. So we decided to have different types of replication, right? One TCP in the open source version, one UDP high performance in the paid offering. So yeah, it's just to illustrate like there can be sort of new creative ways to make it work as well.
And one concern that I sometimes quite frequently actually see hear about open source is a concern of a developer that his or her open source product will be used by a larger competitor that will grow and eventually will become a large successful company using something that you built for free. A good example maybe is the recent IPO of Snowflake, right? It's a closed source company, but they use open source databases like FoundationDB, for instance. So do you see any potential threats here? Do you see any tensions between you doing something for the community and somebody else's who may use it as well for commercial purposes somehow?
Yeah, I think, again, this is definitely a threat, but like in the early days, I think it's a bit misguided. So I guess as a creator of your project, you might be a little bit over concerned about, yeah, this issue when actually sort of nobody knows about it, right? So if the product is not being widely used, it's very, very unlikely that this sort of thing will happen, especially with cloud providers and Amazon taking your product, putting it on the cloud and monetizing it. So I think, yeah, it becomes a problem a bit later in time. And it's definitely something that is of concern. There are some sort of new licenses that try to fix this problem. I mean, the great thing in a way is that VCs are now starting to pour more and more money into open source projects because they really see the monetization happening and big successes being built. So there are ways to really mitigate this risk over time. But I don't know. We initially were super worried about it. We actually built the entire stack from scratch on our own, and then realized that nobody was actually doing anything, and that overthinking about it could actually be detrimental. And for us, the best distribution model was really a very permissive license, so Apache 2.0 in our case, which really fueled adoption in the early days and was very, very beneficial for us. So yeah, it's a real tough one nonetheless.
But it's a nice problem to have when somebody wants to copy.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, if you have that problem, you're probably already in a good spot, probably.
You actually mentioned another topic that we typically talk closer to the end of the conversation, which is pretty much now. It's fundraising. So I need to make one disclosure I haven't made at the beginning. So I'm a very tiny, small investor in QuestDB. So today I would probably not to focus a lot about fundraising and about talking with investors. Again, I'm biased, but maybe I would ask you to talk about one particular type of investor, namely accelerators. So you are a part of Y Combinator cohort. Maybe based on the example of Y Combinator or some other examples, you might tell the audience about accelerators. Is it a waste of time? Is it not? What are useful things? What are not very useful? These kind of things.
Yeah, so I would say it depends on the accelerator. So yeah, we're going to take YC here as a reference point because I don't know about the others. But yeah, I would say that YC definitely did change the trajectory of our company for perhaps, yeah, 3 big reasons. So first, the reach and the network of YC is pretty immense. So just to give like, an idea, we had more than 150 inbounds after demo day from VCs. The network, is gigantic, more than 2,000 YC companies, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We can just reach out to. We get reach to, OSS founders like GitLab CEO we spoke to recently. And, generally it's just a great way to learn and get access to potential users of the product as well, right? The second thing is YC does help you throughout the entire lifespan of the company. So, for example, they've got the Series A program. They got lawyers always there to assist. They got the Series B program. They've got a special hiring platform. They got a YC Continue to Grow program when you start to scale properly. So yeah, it's actually a bit more than just like a 3-month program. They're really there, right? And then you have your partners you can just reach out to anytime. Really literally for big questions, right? So I don't know if you face like big decisions like how do I fire my first employee, that kind of thing, they're really here to provide perspective and help you. So I think that's super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's about how much you make from this opportunity yourself. So for example, we decided to create this open source YC office hours.
Mm-hmm.
And we just basically gathered all the YC OSS companies together, and now we're trying to make something pretty cool out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we hope it's just gonna add a lot of value for all of those companies. So yeah, they're just great opportunities to make something pretty special out of the experience. And then just being part of this, having batchmates to speak to who share the same ups and downs is very helpful. You're a bit less lonely in the journey, so to speak. So that is great. So yeah, I would say those are the reasons why such a great thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And there are many guides, many advices on how to prepare to YC. What would be your maybe number 1 or number 2 advice to how to think about preparation for interviews or for application? What are the most important things a founder or a team should care before applying or maybe before an interview to the YC?
Yeah, I think the guys are not really looking for the idea as much as people think. They more look at, the founders. So are the founders going to pull this off? Are they sort of traits that give the impression that, those founders could be doing something special? And that is sort of confirmed by the fact that, a lot of founders pivot during the batch, and some of them have been extremely successful. I think Brex founders did pivot during their batch like 3 years ago, and now it's a multi-billion dollar company. So it's a bit less about the idea and more about whether founders have what it takes to to build a very big business. In order, sort of tactical advice, I just did a lot of prep in terms of interviews. So we did a lot of mock interviews, and that really helped because you just rehearse things a little bit better. It's good to be concise. What I really look for is how founders communicate. So if you communicate well, it's pretty important, because you're constantly telling a story to people, right? So you're telling a story to investors. You might be telling the story to potential customers. You need to be able to explain your business to any kind of stakeholders, right? Even your mom. So if you're able to communicate to any sort of from a very technical person to a non-technical person at all, from investors to customers, it's a good start. If you're not able to say what you're doing really and articulating it very well, that's probably not going to cut it. So I think that's probably the most important thing, and that's why you see all the YC companies having the sort of 2-liners description of their company being quite neat and well structured, because that's one of the first thing we work on as we join the batch.
Amazing. We covered quite a lot of topics today. Switching to a startup, co-founding team, product market fit, open source, a lot of things. But is there any topic or any theme maybe that you believe it's important to talk about, but we didn't talk? Is there anything that we have missed during the conversation today?
Yeah, I'll add one thing. And this maybe comes from the YC experience and what I've seen. I think I guess I'm getting more and more convinced that the one characteristic that is very fundamental here is sort of persistence, right? Not giving up in order to build something out of your idea or product. So if you give up too soon, by definition, it's not going to work out. And yeah, it's really about being able to go through the downs and figuring out how to unblock the situation and keep going. And if you're passionate enough about the problem you're solving, and if you're really sort of gathering information from your user or potential users, I think that's a very, very good start. And just relentless, not giving up and really focusing on those two things: products, customers at the beginning, whilst maybe thinking a bit less about company building, all those things, right? That is probably likely to help a lot.
Thanks. That's an amazing thread and amazing addition to what we've talked today. Let's finish our conversation for today. Thank you very much, Nick, once again. And I'm sure we will hear a lot of interesting news and updates from QuestDB and from you guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter.